Hi, everyone, and welcome to Autism Awareness Australia's Ought to Know webinar series, Making Your NDIS Plan Work Harder. I'm your host, Nicole Hurley. I'm part of the team here at AAA. I've also got a son who's a participant in the NDIS, so I know all too well how wonderfully life-changing the NDIS can be, but also how complex and confusing it can feel. We're going to get into some great conversations today about making your plan work harder, understanding fundings, and making some really great choices. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Leap-In. It's proudly sponsored by them. They are Australia's leading NDIS plan manager, supporting thousands of Australians with disability in every state and territory. They are driven by the belief of people over profits, and they help people with disability live their best lives and get the most out of their NDIS plans. So thank you to Leap-In. Joining me today is Shannon Eales. Welcome, Shannon.
Thanks, Nicole. It's nice to be here.
So great to have you. Shannon is a longtime friend of AAA. She's also the Managing Director of Autism Partnership, where she leads a multidisciplinary team focused on improving outcomes for children with autism and their families. She's passionate. She's got 20 years backed with clinical expertise, and we just love her. And she's the person that's going to help us with all of our NDIS questions today. So thank you, Shannon.
That's quite the intro, Nicole. I'll try to live up.
It's all true, you know that.
It's just like you blink and 20 years goes by. Yeah.
I know, it's not anger. Yeah. Something that does age us is the NDIS.
Yeah.
As great as it is, it can be really confusing for our families. So you live and breathe the NDIS each and every day. So why don't we take it right to the start? When parents get that first plan for their child, what are the things they need to really get into? What matters in that big document that they really need to understand when they get that first plan?
Yeah. And there'll be some meetings and things that happen before the first plan, and the sort of waiting that happens, I think, is sometimes a frustration for families. So once they get that first plan, and it's really understanding, okay, what doors does this open for me? Hopefully, by the time you get to the first plan, families have some sense of what they're looking for, but not always, because service providers are hard to come by. It's also really hard to find people who will say, here's what I think would be helpful for your child. So I think maybe I would answer that question by saying, while you're waiting for your first plan to come, I think what I would encourage families to do is to try to really understand what their kids need. And I think about that firstly, irrespective of the funding that's coming. So trying to get professionals to make recommendations that are not about the services that they deliver, but just hand on heart, what does my child need? And really starting there. I think that's the place, so that by the time you get your first plan, or when you have it, it's like, okay, I understand what my child needs. Of those things, what could my funding be used for? So I think often it happens backwards. And providers do this too, is that, okay, you have a plan, what should we use it for? And actually it should be the other way. Okay, what do I need? Okay, here's my list of things that I need. What can my plan fund?
And so when you get that plan as a parent, how do you know, sort of to your point, how do you know if the funding in that plan is going to marry up and fit the needs of your child? And if you don't think it's going to be good enough, do we have anything that we can do about that? Like, can we push back and fight for more? And
absolutely,
you're in that period of not knowing what you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that first outcome, what we're seeing is that it is almost universally children who are coming into the scheme for the first time are getting a plan somewhere between $15,000 and $21,000. And we actually see that for kids with a whole variety of needs. So I'm not sure that all of the information you provided going into that first planning meeting is actually being used genuinely to create that first plan, perhaps. So I would be thinking about, okay, here's the things that I know that my child needs through all the research I've done, through all the people that I've talked to. Does that plan deliver those services? And if not, what do I do next? I think is your question. And so there are review processes. There are different kinds of review depending on sort of the reason for review. And then there's ultimately an appeal process. So that's a kind of sort of long way, takes a long time to get through, but there are definitely options. If you're sitting in a place where you feel like my child is not making progress in these services. So we see many, many children who have their first year of service has been in an hour or two of allied health per week, and they're just not making progress. So in that situation, you certainly can request a plan review of a couple of different types, depending on the scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And I guess when you get that first plan, it's like learning a new language because there's all these different categories of funding. So are you able to help explain, what's the difference between core, capacity building, capability? It all sounds the same.
Yeah.
What are the different buckets of funding and what can people use in those different buckets?
Sure, absolutely. And maybe I can talk about that too in terms of the plans that we most often see for really young kids. So often the two categories that we see for children are typically core support and capacity building. So think of capacity building as anything that is teaching you skills. So any of the therapies that you access, anything that is about building skills, and then think of core support as things that are supporting daily life, perhaps. So if you are going to speech therapy or occupational therapy or behavior therapy, that comes under capacity building. If you're having a support worker come in to help with after school routines or in the morning or on the weekends because your child needs really close one-to-one support, that would come under core. There'll be some other things. It's not common for very young children to have very much core support at all in that initial plan. So it may just be other things like some low-cost assistive technology, or which could be sort of communication, really low-cost communication systems. It could be some things around resources. It could be, if your child is older, it could be things around sort of nappies or that sort of thing in core support. Typically, it will be a very small amount, $500 or less, and then the bulk of your funding will sit in capacity building, and usually in a bucket, if I can call it that, called a sort of early childhood support. So that can be used flexibly across different allied health professions to deliver the supports that your child needs.
And for maybe sort of older kids, is it possible to move funding between categories, or is that a big no-no?
Yeah, I mean, there's talk of wanting to do that. And during COVID, there was some flexibility. Right now, my advice would be to contact your coordinator or your LAC just to check, can I use this for this? Can I use that for that? Because there has been some rule changes. Typically, no. Certainly capacity building needs to be used for capacity. There has in the past been there's some core support that can be given flexibly and some that is stated. So that's the other thing that will happen with different components of your plan. Some of it will be stated and it will say that stated support, and some of it will be flexible. But if in doubt, contact either your early childhood partner or your local area coordinator, your LAC, or if you have a support coordinator, they'll also be able to help you.
Yeah, great. That's great advice, Jen. We get a lot of questions from parents and even myself, like you get given this funding or budget. Have you, in your experience, learnt of any great budgeting tools so we don't overspend, or, you plan it out for the period of your plan? So is there anything to help track our spending? Any tips that some other families you may know use?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very like lo-fi. I feel like Google Sheets is like my go-to. So there may be some budget tracking software that you can use. I think mapping out the 12 months and really understanding how much funding do I have, and doing some simple-ish calculations around, okay, it's going to cost me this much per week. What does that work out to over 52 weeks? If you can have a support coordinator funded, and that support coordination funding sits separate to your other budgets. So there are a couple of things that you can get in your plan: support coordination, plan management, that aren't going to take away from your other supports, but may help you in managing your plan. Because I say, they just do the calculations. Like, yeah, great idea, Shannon. But what time? 2 a.m. when my children are asleep. So you can have support coordinator. They will help you do that. So that's someone who's there to help you source different supports and kind of make sure that all fits within your budget. Also, your plan manager, they will have technology and tools that they use to map out the spending. So a plan manager is someone who is an intermediary who will pay the bills for you. If you're self-managing, you can still have support coordination. So that means you're kind of paying your own invoices. You don't have a plan manager, but you can still have a support coordinator who will help you with the budgeting over that 12-month period. If you feel like I just don't have space for that, Shannon, have someone call in the troops.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was one of the things where self-managed was budgeting in for the next year reviews, making those reports cost a lot of money in your next reviews to make sure that you budget for that. So there's, prioritizing spending between therapies and whatnot, but also making sure you've got enough in your plan to help you at your plan review time as well. Is there any pitfalls around that you've seen with some families?
No, I mean, I think knowing where you're at and where your funding's going to go so that you can be really strategic about it. There aren't any children I know. There may be children out there, but there aren't any children I know who have like excess funding. So we're really looking at making every dollar count. So I would ask your providers, can you give me a quote for the next 12 months of what this is going to look like? Or even you could do it today and just say, to the end of my plan, which is, November 12th, can you tell me how much I'm scheduled to spend with you so that you can add all those together and ask them to add in are their reports. So for us at AP, that's sort of not an additional cost, but there would be. Certainly, I know that reports can be really expensive. Thinking about which ones of those you need too would be my other tip. So ask your provider to help you too. They should really easily be able to budget out for you what you're likely to spend with them.
And you mentioned being strategic with the funding. How do we prioritize the funding, therapies versus equipment versus support coordination? Is there any top tips that you have on how to prioritize that? And especially for some of our rural and regional families who I know don't have access to all of those things. Do you have any advice there?
Yeah, I think things like support coordination and plan management will sit to the side. So sometimes families are not accessing those services because they're worried that it'll take away from their therapy budget, for example, but they'll sit to the side. So with your capacity building budget, I think that's why I say really be seeking from your providers, hand on heart, what does my child need? Let's not blindly just do what we did last year, because I see way too many kids who are in therapies that their family feel like are not effective for them, and the recommendation is to continue with that. So I would really be asking your providers to be very honest, like forget the funding and the logistics and the access. All of that is a list of things that we need to figure out later. First, it's just what does my child need, so that then you can prioritize. And you are going to need to prioritize goals. If you're working within an initial NDIS plan in particular of $20,000, you're not going to be able to work on all of the things that your child needs, but understanding what are all the things so that you can prioritize the ones that are either kind of foundation skills that are going to open up other things in the future or are really critical. That would be first. So I would prioritize identifying this is my key goal, and think about which service delivers those rather than prioritizing the services first. Does that make sense, Nicole?
100%. You can't do everything, right? There's not enough time. You've got to look at the family as well as how many hours is this going to be? How are you going to logistically support it? So I think, getting those short to medium term goals locked in. And it doesn't mean you don't have to look at your long-term goals, but it's really, really good to get those short to medium terms locked.
And I think so. And I think as a provider too, I see it's a very active process to get providers to do that. I don't come across that many providers who are really sitting down with families and saying, here are all the things we need to work on. Here are the things that I actually think we can work on within your funding budget. And here is what I would consider success over the next 12 months. For me, I worry that the experience of most children and families is that we're going to services and we're going to them and we have goals and we'll get a report, at the 12-month mark to see whether we made progress. I hope it's better than that. But in my experience, those real sort of deep pause, think about it really critically. Those conversations don't happen often enough. And unfortunately, as a parent or carer, that may need to be led by you.
Yeah, I agree, Shannon. I've been in service providers where you don't get any of that. So it's really understanding, what does good look like? What does success look like? Or even more importantly, what does no progress look like? And what should parents do in that scenario? Because sometimes there is nowhere else to go. Other times, it might be really tricky to know what to do in that circumstance.
Yeah, and it can be difficult. I mean, change providers, and in the cities, like wait lists. If you're rural and regional, it's like, well, great idea, but there is no one else. But getting really specific about the goals, you can do with any provider, and then it may emerge that you need to find a different provider, but certainly you can improve outcomes by being more specific about the things that you're targeting and knowing how you're going to measure those.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. You mentioned self-managed, plan managed, agency managed. Yeah. What are those three things for people that are new or may not, be in those different types of management? And what are the pros and cons that you see of each of those different approaches?
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we'll start with self-managed. So that is where you are managing your funds. So you receive a plan, there'll be a budget on the portal. You would decide how you use those funds to achieve your child's goals, and you would get the invoice from the provider, you upload it, the payment comes into your account, you transfer it to the provider, much sort of like how Medicare works as well. Yeah. In plan management and in that self-managed, you still need to make sure that you're using your funds for sort of the agreed purpose and that you're working towards goals, but you have some more flexibility around how you do that, who you engage. You can go with registered or unregistered providers, and it's sort of up to you a little bit more. In plan management, which is sort of a middle option, which is where somebody else will do the paying of the bills for you. So your providers would send the invoice to your plan manager and your plan manager would make that payment. There is still flexibility in the sense that you can be with registered or unregistered providers, but there may be increasingly so some more restrictions just around who you engage for that or how much the hourly payment is, for example. So it's slightly more restricted. And then, sorry, go ahead, Nick.
So in that plan managed space, do you get to agree with them on how that money is being spent and what it goes to? Is there a lot of collaboration that goes into that?
Yes, it's your decision still. As the representative of your child, it's like, this is a service provider I want to go with. Your plan manager will tell you, well, yes, I can claim for that line item through that provider, or I can't, or actually they're not a registered provider and they have rates that are higher. I can't claim that higher rate, for example. So there's a little bit of probably discovery around, this is the provider I want to go with, and having conversations with your plan manager about that. But it's still your child's funding and your choice on who you go with and what you do. Also, your choice of plan manager. So there are lots of different plan managers, and you might find a good fit with one and not with another. They're a service provider like many other people in the scheme. So, and you can change anytime you want as well.
And so if I was self-managed, just say I'm new to it and I go, yeah, I can do this, but my circumstances change or family circumstances change and I just am so overwhelmed with self-managed, can I move to plan or agency managed easily?
Yeah, relatively easily. Yeah. I think to go from yes is the answer. You can do a variation and move to either of those or agency management, which we'll talk about in a moment, but you can. I say easily because, yes, in theory, it should be fine. And because there is a process for that. Right. To move from agency management or plan management back to self-management sometimes can take a little bit longer, but it's certainly your choice. There are guidelines in place for when the agency determines which of those plan management types you are. But yes, you can in most circumstances. Then agency management is where the agency is managing your funds. So you can choose providers from registered providers. So there are both registered and unregistered providers within the NDIS. And in agency managed, you have to go with registered providers, and then the provider will claim from the portal or from the NDIA the invoices. So you would see that, but they would claim it down directly from the agency.
Okay.
In terms of choice, It's probably the most restricted model because you have to go with registered providers. That may or may not make a difference to you.
And you say choice, and some other words that we hear a lot is reasonable and necessary. But what does that all really mean, and who decides what is reasonable and necessary and choice, and who controls it?
It's a great question, Nicole. So that is decided by the agency in almost all circumstances. So you would get recommendations from providers, you would have things that you want as a family, and you're essentially making that request through the planning meeting. Your LAC or your early childhood partner is gathering that information, uploading it to the system, and then someone from the agency is going to make the decision about your funding. And they're going to make that decision against what's called the reasonable and necessary criteria from the Act. So there's a set of things that they're looking at. Is it something that should be funded by the NDIS? Is there a cost benefit of that? Is it likely to be beneficial and effective? Would it cause harm? Should it be funded by the NDIS or another department? So they're asking a series of questions, and then they will make the funding decision.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and that's like it's grey though, and I think one of the challenges is that we see different interpretations of that. And there's huge variability in plans, and we can't see any correlation between the needs of the child necessarily and the plan outcome at the moment. And I think that's something that the agency are trying to work on, is getting more consistency. It's difficult.
Yeah, it definitely is difficult. We're getting a couple of questions around our school age children. So can you use your NDIS plan in school hours, in the school setting? What's been your experience in that space?
Yeah, yes is the short answer. And then it depends. So if you're thinking about what does school fund and what does the NDIS fund, anything that is education related would fall under the responsibility of the school. So certainly anything academic, support at school, changing the curriculum, any modifications that were needed. What can be funded by the NDIS is anything that is specific to your child and specific to their disability related needs. So things that they may fund would be things like consultation and capacity building for the school team. There could be sort of extra things that your child needs through the day that are really related. So their iPad for their communication system, for example, if that was needed. Things they won't fund are like education support in class. So someone to be with them.
Teacher aides.
That's right. Yeah. So that should be funded by education. So there is this sort of, sometimes families can be in the middle of the NDIS saying, well, we're not funding that. And then it's like, well, they're not getting enough support at school. And it's really tricky. But anything that is, schools are required to make reasonable adjustments for autistic kids or children with disabilities. So they need to do that. So anything that the NDIS is funding needs to be beyond those reasonable adjustments that education are required to make. But things like speeches and things going in, absolutely. That really comes down to the school.
Yeah.
And how they feel about that happening. And since the NDIS, I think so many more kids are accessing services, which is, potentially great. But it does mean that schools are a little bit worried that particularly perhaps specialist settings where there are lots of children who have lots of different providers. They're like, okay, well, how do we fit 20 different speeches in here at 11 a.m. So there is some consideration around the school. And sometimes that will come back as we can't, like we're not allowed to use NDIS supports in school. I'm not sure that that's actually the case, but it certainly may be what people believe. Yeah.
Yeah, it is really different from school to school and setting to setting. Transport to school, can that be funded via your NDIS plans? Yeah, depending on distance and
and the needs of the child and the reason that you need it, and it would need to be very specifically related to their disability.
Yeah, right. One way that we use our NDIS plan is in those really important IEP and behavioural plan meetings where our whole team comes with the school. We've got a very inclusive school that allows that, but it's also something that I hear from parents that they really like to bring their team of allied health and professionals to help their kid get the school adjustments. And it kind of gives them the clinical cred that what the parents and the child is asking for is sort of backed with them. So that's always a great way to
Absolutely.
use it. Yeah.
And ideally that person would be coming in relatively frequently. We certainly work with kids in school where there are people there very often, or a consultation only model. For us, the behaviour consultant might be there fortnightly. doing a little bit of an observation, having a look at what's happening on the playground, chatting to the teacher, and helping to goal set for the behavioral and social curriculum for the kids. Because that's, I think, the part that sometimes schools that struggle with, is just how do we teach the behavioral and social things. So often your NDIS supports can be used for that. But at those critical goal setting meetings, it's a great idea, Nicole. Yeah.
And then what about when your child moves along from those sort of short, medium, long-term goals, but across, the school setting? So transitioning from prep to primary to secondary. Does the NDIS change in terms of your plans there? Like what's required in primary school could be very different to secondary school?
Yeah, yes. So you can ask them to consider that for sure. So you will probably, and your child is young, you're probably on a 12-month planning cycle. You can at any point ask for a review of that if something changes. But as you're having those plan reviews every 12 months, as children get older, you might get a 2 or 3 year plan, but you could always ask for a review if something is changing. So obviously, if there's a big life transition is one of the criteria for requesting what's called a change of circumstance review. So it could be that, you had your planner meeting in, March. And at that point, it looked like high school was sorted. We had a plan, like everything was going okay. And then that school closes or something like that. That's literally happened. So it's like, oh my gosh, like we need a new plan. And this, we had this lovely scenario set up, and now we actually do need a funding review because we actually have to create a whole different plan, which mean the school's further away. We need different supports. They don't have a speechy like the other school had. So you can certainly ask for a plan review. Yeah. And same with exiting school. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a great segue into plan reviews. It can be such a stressful time for parents. What reports are required? What kind of planning tips can you give parents? Like how far out should they start to book those reports in? Is it parent reports, clinical reports, statements? What do you think is your best bet to get the best plan review?
Yeah. Okay. So things within the agency move right now often. So I think the first thing to do is if your your early childhood partner or your LAC, here's me getting all of the different people. There's no hope. So if someone is contacting you to say we need to do a plan review, I would ask them, what reports do you think we need? Yeah, just to double check, because there themes happen and the agency want particular reports. Like right now, functional capacity assessment from an OT is being requested quite often. They're very expensive, so that may or may not be helpful, and it may also depend on the services that you're seeking going forward. So if you're asking for a dramatically increased plan, you will need to provide some really significant evidence as to why that's required. So that would be recommendations, really thorough recommendations from multiple professionals who are consistent in what they're saying, and including lots of examples around what daily life looks like, what's happening for you and your family, anything that is around unsafe behaviours. So if that's risk of harm to the child themselves or to other people or the environment, those things really need to be explicitly spelled out. Because I think sometimes I see with families when they're so wonderful and they're just like getting on with life and doing what they need to do, and it's just like the way life has always been. And I imagine also it's really difficult to sit in the moment and sort of describe in detail what the challenges of the day look like, or what would happen if all of these things weren't like perfectly aligned, and all the scaffolding that you're doing. So I think trying to be really descriptive about what daily life looks like and what the challenges are would be very, very helpful. And you can write that as a family impact statement or a carer statement. Also asking your providers to do the same. And again, that comes back to really having that conversation about what is their genuine recommendation. I don't want to know at that point what they can do within the funding I have. I want to know what is your genuine recommendation for my child. So the other thing at the moment, I'm not too sure how much of a difference all of the reports that you gather actually make. I'm not, and I'm genuinely not sure.
Yeah, I'm
So
a bit skeptical too, because for 8 years we pay a lot of money to get these reports and we upload them into the portal, and sometimes we don't have a plan review. There could be rollovers. So I've just spent thousands of dollars on something that wasn't used or referenced to when we do have plan reviews. So
that's
yeah,
my worry a
I
little bit.
agree with
And
you.
when kids have sort of $20,000 and there's a $3,000 or $4,000 functional capacity assessment and $1,000 language assessment and $1,000, or $5,000 autism assessment. It's like, which one of those is really going to make a difference? And so that's why I would encourage you to talk to your LAC and or your early childhood partner. You also can ask for a review. Like recently, we've had families be contacted and they're saying, we're doing a plan review, whether you have reports or not. And then when you have your reports, you can request a review. And for me, it's like, okay. But it's hard to say that those reports are actually going to make a difference. You certainly want to put your best foot forward. You could say, we've got really limited funding, so we haven't done this full assessment. If that would be helpful for you, we can do it.
Yeah.
The goals and what will be achieved with the funding is important.
And I touched on it's such a stressful time for parents, leading up to it, going into it. It can be really, really tough on them. What are some top tips for parents to keep sane and keep their mental health throughout this? Because sometimes the outcome isn't what they want. And we'll talk about that in the next question. But what are some sort of top tips that you can really help parents through the plan review time periods?
It's so difficult, Nicole. And it's so difficult because we actually don't know what the outcome will be. Because you can provide all of those reports and then the funding can be drastically different to what you thought it would be. I mean, talking to your your LAC or your early childhood partner, they may have some more information on what they think is likely to be funded. For me, I would be, perhaps this is just how I approach life. It's just low expectations. Like, let's know what our plan is if this funding isn't what we want it to be, particularly if your child currently has support workers after school and you work full time. Like, what's going to happen if that support worker funding gets cut next week? So I do think it's wise to go in preparing for the worst. But that doesn't help reduce the stress, though. I just don't know that there's anything we can do except to say there are options for what we do next. And there are kids and families in really, really difficult situations. I hope that they are surrounded by a team who's going to be there with them. But it's really, really hard because it's so unknown and it's so inconsistent.
And we hear that all too often, right, Shan, that you just, the situations change, the funding changes, and it really impacts not only the child, but the whole family unit, which leads me to the next question. You did allude to this about what next. So if you're not happy and you absolutely think there's a case for, this isn't going to help my child or my family, I've heard of AAT, tribunals, ART. What does that all stand for? What can we do next?
Okay. All right.
And look, we could be all the whole day you explain.
Yeah. No. That's okay. It's important. I think that for me, it's like knowledge is power. You can choose which path you go. Part of my job is to help families understand what this path might look like.
And it's kind of that question, when do you go? Like, when do you know when to go to a tribunal?
Yeah. So the first step before tribunal, which I'll explain, is an internal review. So if you get a funding result back and you really feel like that person made the wrong decision, they missed some evidence, they didn't fully consider something, then you can do what's called an S100 internal review. And that's where you ask someone else at the agency, the NDIA, to look at the information you provided and decide if they would have come to the same decision. It's called an internal review. You can do that by just calling your LAC or your early childhood partner and asking them to request that. If you do that, I would always call the 1-800-NDIS number a week later just to make sure that review has been submitted. You
Do
can
you have
also,
like a review number or a case number that you can reference?
yeah, I mean, usually you typically would get a confirmation, but sometimes it can come a couple of weeks later. So a couple of weeks could go by, and then you call your LAC and they're like, oh no, sorry, I didn't get to it. Or yeah, I'm just doing it today. It's like, oh. So just make sure it's been submitted. If you call the 1-800 number, they can look at your child's file and see what reviews are in play. So that's a tip for anything that you're requesting from the agency. I would always call and just double check that it's in process. So that internal review, you also can email the NDIS inquiries email address and just request a review. It will take 4 to 6 weeks at the moment. The timing is about that. That's about what they try and get it done within 60 to 90 days. We're seeing them come back within that 4 to 6 weeks at the moment. And they will give you a written answer and a written response to whether or not they're going to change your child's funding package. And they can do nothing. So they can confirm the original decision. They can modify the decision, but still not to what you requested, or they could make the choice to fund the supports that have been requested. That's step one. If you
that sounds really long already.
yeah. It is. It's like it is. And it's the most frustrating kind of review, I think, because in my experience, the most likely outcome of that is no change to the plan.
Right.
So you also have to do that within 3 months of the decision. So if you get a planning outcome today, you have 3 months to lodge that S100 request. You can provide more information, and they will often ask for more information when you submit it. I would say get it in the queue, and then you can add the information while you're in the waiting phase. So I wouldn't, when you're requesting that internal review, I wouldn't wait until you have more reports to request it. I would request it and then add the reports. Okay. You have time because you're going to be waiting anyway. If you feel like that S100 outcome doesn't result in a plan that meets your child's needs, then you can appeal that decision externally. It's got an external review / appeal, same thing, at what's called the ART, the Administrative Review Tribunal. The ART is the new version of the AAT. So same thing. If you hear those two terms, that's the same place.
No wonder we get confused.
Yeah, it's so confusing. And at the ART, that's an external process that is like other tribunals. So it reviews government decisions, so decisions around Centrelink, immigration, NDIS. You can take a decision made by government and ask the ART to review it. And that process, question there.
Okay, I'm like, that sounds really formal. Does that mean I need a lawyer? Does it cost money? How do you engage that?
Yeah, it doesn't cost money, but it is formal. And often, I mean, in my experience in the AAT, children are often seeking, they're children who with profound autism and are seeking quite high intensity services. So often the agency will have lawyers involved. If it's a lower sort of request, perhaps they'll do it internally, but often the NDIS will engage private lawyers to represent them through what is a mediation process. So there's no cost. You're not liable for the costs of the agency's legal expenses or anything if you are unsuccessful. But you're essentially asking them, the person who is the member, who sort of feels like the judge but isn't a judge, but they're the member of the ART, if you can't come to an agreement with the agency through the mediation process, then the member will make the decision. Okay. So it's a long process. It's like a meeting and then a lot of waiting. Provide some more information, a lot of waiting, a meeting, a lot of waiting. So it could go on for 6 to 18 months.
Wow.
A long time. Yeah. And so that's where it's really important, and what becomes really critical in the appeal process is that you really have strong rationales for what your child needs, and you have multiple professionals supporting that. So that's where I think knowing, okay, this is what my child needs, this and this are covered by their plan, this is not, and it's critical for this reason. Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah.
I feel like that's it. And I feel like days like today, it's like, what can I give you that's practical? Yeah. We could rant rave all day. What is practical, and also what the answers to making your plan work for you are actually kind of boring and laborious. Like there's no kind of magic do this and you get more funding, or do that. It's really a process of kind of deeply understanding what does our child need, and then how do we, what are the steps?
And then the magic comes from that. Once you get it right and
you get the right providers.
Child. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
But you've got to do all the practical steps, and 100%. Before we go to some Q&A, and we've been answering a few throughout the webinar, what's one thing that you would leave behind with parents about the NDIS?
Look, it has that's a big question. It has the potential. I mean, the NDIS is a wonderful thing. That it has the potential to really, really help. Children are often on my mind, but all participants. For me, again, I feel like I'm harping on, but it is encouraging you to think about your child first, irrespective of the NDIS plan. It's just what you want to know from professionals is, in their clinical experience and based on the research, what is it that is most likely to be effective in giving your child more skills? That's the heart of the question. And then how the funding covers that is after that. But for me, and some people will disagree with that, because they'll say, well, why would you talk about a service that's never going to be available? Like, actually, what we're after is genuine, informed decision-making. We want to give families the information so they can make a choice about what works for their family, for their child. Whatever families choose to do, we support. But you can't make an informed decision without professionals who are willing to tell you, irrespective of funding, what does my child need? So that would probably think about your child and their services separate to NDIS, and then overlay NDIS would be the thing. The other thing would be just never sit and wait, is my probably more practical tip too. It's like, if someone says we'll be in touch with you, don't assume that will happen. Always call. Many, many, many times. It's absolutely a squeaky wheel system.
I totally concur with that.
Yeah.
I remember just stalking to just try to get to that first step before even getting a plan, and really just bringing your phone call skills on that. And
I think about it as, if you're at home stressing about it, like, tell them. I don't waiting quietly and just sort of doing things at the rate that people tell you they're going to happen. It doesn't work. You're not going to, and some families will say, well, what if I make a complaint, or if I call, is that going to mean that I'm going to get less funding because they think that I'm, being annoying or putting pressure on? Like, you will be, obviously when we're calling and asking, it's like you're respectful and understanding the person you're talking to is probably not the decision maker, but you're certainly conveying that need and urgency in real time is really, really important. It's like, I think about this at work too. It's like, if people need to try and live as close as possible to your experience, and you just can't do that if every 6 months you're like, oh yeah, that's that place, things are really hard. What they need to hear every week is things are really tricky. We really need that plan review. Is it coming? Here's what's happening for us, to give them that shared experience of what things are like.
Thanks, Shen. Such sound advice and leave behinds. We've answered a lot of the questions throughout this, but one that has come through is a question around using NDIS funding to help fund a support worker to help my child do their homework. So keeping the child on track and ensure they complete the homework. Is that something people can fund in their plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think about that as the behaviours around learning. And I think it's a grey line, right? And because if the child can sort of behaviorally, and I think about behaviors as every behavior, not challenging behaviors. It's like all the behaviors of learning, being able to, do all of the things that they need to do that homework sheet, for example. They may need, specific to their disability, there may be supports that they need that make that harder for them to do. So they do generally need the support worker to help them plan out how they're going to do it, to help them identify when they need to take a break. I'm making things up. I don't know what it looks like for this child. So yes would be my short answer. If your child is like, all the behavioral and social things that are required for doing homework are going fine, and it's a tutor there purely for academic, I would want to check on that one. I would certainly contact your LAC, because I think that's a real grey area. There's probably some argument to make around just, do they need more supports outside of school to do those things? Think about it as, does my child need more support than a typically developing child of the same age? And if the answer is yes, then probably it can be funded with a support worker, because it's probably around more things than just the academic work. But you could check with your local area coordinator about that. The thing, though, when you're talking to the local area coordinator, would be to really describe the whole thing. If you call and say, my child needs help with their homework, can that be funded? They're probably going to say no.
Yeah.
If you're like, my child needs help to, make a schedule, follow a schedule, know when they need breaks, take the breaks, provide the sort of fun experiences in between, then that would be a different thing.
And what else could you use a support worker for? I know that a lot of families, when they're transitioning from that sort of early childhood, early intervention to teenage adulthood, they don't know what a support worker is. What can you use a support worker for?
Yeah, I mean, anything that is about maintaining kind of daily life. So it could be things from routines that happen at home. It could be showering and bathing and support with that. It could be going out into the community. And I think community access, that person could go with you, if they could go with you, or they could go on their own with your child. I think we're often with families where there's multiple children and it's just really hard. So they have the support worker, go with them so the whole family can still go on go places, but somebody is there as the extra support for the child with autism. So it depends. I mean, I think it's really, really broad. If your child is, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and they want to go and do soccer, and they could have someone go with them to be part of that soccer class, because maybe they want it to be someone that blends in, that it's just like, I don't really necessarily want my mum with me, but I'm happy to have James comes along and plays soccer. So I would think about it as opening doors, supporting daily life, of course. Sometimes there are kids need to go, there's a family, there's 3 children, they need to go in 3 different directions because there are multiple children with disabilities, or because there's appointments that need to happen. So facilitating some of those things too. If in doubt, though, talk to your LAC. Just really be thinking about how you describe that. And my thing is just always, for me, which is, this is my job, so it's easy for me to find time to do this, but it's just like, where does it say that? Someone says no, I'm like, really? Like, where? Tell me where that says that, because there is the law, and then there is folklore galore. Of just like rules that people think exist that actually don't.
Yeah, and we must say that you must follow the rules, because you do get audited. There is, do follow the rules.
You want to follow the rules, because I think you want to, yes, you absolutely do. And there are consequences for not. And I mean, the families that I see are definitely, they're looking for services for kids and to help their children. I think when you're genuine about that and asking genuine questions, sometimes it's just making sure that the person you're asking really understands what's happening for you. So, for example, sometimes families will say, well, I'm out of funding, so I need a review. What they actually mean is, my child's not meeting their goals, and within the funding that they currently have doesn't support the goals they need. But if you call the planner and say, can I do a review because I'm out of funding, they're going to say no.
Yeah.
If you call and say, things are actually getting worse, they're not getting better, my child's not meeting their goals, can we do a review? They'll talk to you about it. So just how you say it and how you describe it, because they have no context, is really important.
We're going to have to wrap it up there, Shannon. Otherwise,
really quickly, Nicole.
I know. It goes so quickly when we're talking about, NDIS and how passionate we all are to, get the best plans for our children. Thank you for sharing your time, your expertise. It's just been wonderful. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Keep an eye out in your inbox. We have recorded it and we will send it out shortly. If you're looking for more evidence-based information about NDIS or anything to do with autism, jump on our website, autismawareness.com.au, or follow us on our YouTube channel, where this will be uploaded and other Ought to Know webinar series are loaded. Thanks again to Leap In for our sponsors to allow for these conversations, and we will see you next time at Ought to Know. Thanks everyone for joining, and particularly you, Shannon.
My pleasure. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.